All right, thank you. All right, thanks for being here on a Saturday morning here at South by Southwest. For those of you who saw this sign and expected the singer, I'm terribly sorry. But I will be performing the national anthem to begin our event here. So here we are. So let's, I want to talk to you about the latest batch of research, tell you about some of the stuff that I found, tell you about some lessons that it might yield from you. And so the latest batch of research that I've done, memorialized in a book called When, has to do with timing. And here's how I got into this topic. I got into this topic out of a mix of frustration and curiosity. Frustration and curiosity. The frustration was that I was making all kinds of timing decisions in my own life. When should I exercise? When should I start a project? When should I abandon a project? When in the day should I do certain kinds of work? When in the day should I do other kinds of work? And I was making those decisions in a really half-assed, sloppy way. And that was frustrating, because I felt there was a better way to make these kinds of decisions. So I started looking around for guidance, and I realized that guidance, unfortunately, did not exist. And that got me curious. Like, why doesn't this exist? There's got to be some research on this. So I started looking at some research on this, and that took me down this incredible, glorious, extraordinary rabbit hole where I spent 2 years looking at research on timing. And it turns out there's a lot of research on this. There's a ginormous amount of research on this, and it's splattered across all kinds of different disciplines. It's in economics, it's in social psychology, but it's in endocrinology, it's in anesthesiology, it's in molecular biology, it's in cognitive science. There's a whole field called chronobiology, the study of our rhythms. And all of these scholars all over the world are asking very, very similar questions about timing. How does time of day affect what we do and how we do it, how we feel about it? How do beginnings affect us? How do midpoints affect us? How do endings affect us? How do groups synchronize in time? And what's sort of curious about all of it is that they're asking very similar questions, but they're not talking to each other because they're academics, right? They don't talk to each other. So, you know, the personality psychologists aren't talking to the social psychologists, aren't talking to the cognitive psychologists. They're not talking to the economists, obviously. No one's talking to the endocrinologists, understandably, and yet they're all asking very similar questions. And so if you go wide enough and deep enough into this research, you can begin to piece together the evidence-based ways, this is the key here, the evidence-based ways to make better, smarter, shrewder decisions about when to do stuff. And so the key idea in all of this is as follows, is that timing, we believe that timing is an art, but it's really a science. We believe that timing is an art, and it's really a science. And we can use this science to make better decisions. So this research is so cool, and it answers a whole array of really, really interesting questions in our lives. For instance, when should you exercise, early in the day or late? Oh, you already know the answer. So there's a very clear answer to this. I don't intend to give it to you, but there's a very clear, no, we can talk about it later on. All right. Why should you never go into the hospital or schedule an important doctor's appointment in the afternoon? For real. We are going to talk about this. For reals. If you learn nothing else here, don't schedule an important doctor appointment or hospital visit in the afternoon. Why are basketball teams trailing by 1 point at halftime more likely to win than those leading by 1 point? Being down by 1 at halftime is an advantage in basketball. That's weird. Why, this is amazing stuff here. Why is singing in a choir as good for your physical and mental health as exercise? Anybody here sing in a choir? Okay, you're going to live longer. You're going to be a lot happier than the rest of us. The research on the positive effects of choral singing are mind-boggling. If you look at the research on exercise, exercise is so good for you on so many dimensions of your life. Choral singing is like way up there, to my amazement. It's almost as good as exercise for you, because there's something about when we synchronize with other people that makes us feel good, that makes us do good. Other kinds of questions. This might be a question on some of your minds, for those of you who are married. When during the year is your spouse most likely to file for divorce? And there are 2 months of the year where there are dramatic spikes in divorce filings across the United States. So if you're married, I would pay very careful attention over the next 21 days, because March is one of those months. So, but what I want to do here is I'm going to pull out, there's so much good stuff here, I'm going to pull out just 3 ideas here that I think are going to be interesting. and also useful. It's going to be provocative, but also pragmatic for you. So here's the first idea, all right? 3 ideas. And I want to start by talking about the day, and the reason for that is this. When I first started studying time and timing, I realized something. Some of you have probably already realized this, that a lot of things we think of as natural units of time are not. A second, not a real thing, something human beings have made up. An hour, not a real thing, something that human beings have made up. A week, not a real thing, something that human beings have made up. But a day is a thing, all right? This is the sophistication of the science that I'm going to bring to you this morning, right? A day is a thing, all right? Why is a day a thing? A day is a real thing because we're on a planet and the planet is turning, and it makes one turn in what we call a day. So I'm going to focus 2 of my 3 ideas on the day, and then one of them more broadly scoped on timing more generally. So here's one idea about the day. The hidden pattern of the day profoundly affects our mood and our performance. The hidden pattern of the day profoundly affects our mood and our performance. All right, so what I want to do here is I want to give you, I'm going to blind you with some science here. Because this is the ideal time to hit people with heavy science. 9:30 in the morning at South by Southwest in a windowless room. This is ideal conditions. I'm going to hit you with 2 studies about mood, 2 studies about performance. Then we're going to pay it off and talk about what to do about it. And I saw a lot of you. Take as many photographs of the slides and everything as you want. There's one slide in here that you're going to want to take a photograph of. I guarantee it. Everybody should take a photograph of this slide. All right. So let's talk about mood, and let's talk about research here. One of the really interesting things going on, and you see some of it you see some discussion of this at South by, and it's a big deal, which is big data. Big data came out, even that phrase, we heard it at South by maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and it sort of followed the hype cycle where it goes, and then it's like, oh, this is not going to be that big of a deal. This is a big deal. Big data is a really, really big deal on a whole dimension of aspects of our life, including research. The ability to use ginormous data sets to find insights that would otherwise have been invisible is extraordinary in what researchers are able to do. So I'm going to start out with a big data study here. There's a piece of software called the Linguistic Inquiry Word Count. Basically a text analyzer. You can put massive amounts of text into it. So pick a novelist, name a novelist. Tolstoy, okay, so Tolstoy. So we could take the novels of Leo Tolstoy, all of the text of them, throw them into this program, and the program can tell us all kinds of things. When is Tolstoy have a scene at night? When does he have it in the morning? When does he say that the sun is shining? When does he say that it's cloudy outside? When does he say that it's raining? How often do women speak in Tolstoy novels? Not often. How often do men speak in Tolstoy novels? A lot. How often does he use the passive tense? How often does he use, when he describes colors, what colors? So it's basically the kind of thing that you would need like 100 PhD English students working full time. And you can just take this material, pop it into this program, and find these kinds of insights. It's actually quite extraordinary. And so two researchers at Cornell decided to use this program to analyze a different body of written work. And the body of written work they decided to use were tweets. 500 million tweets. A lot of tweets. 500 million tweets. Remember, tweets are words. 500 million tweets from 2.5 million users, none of whom were the president of the United States, from 84 countries, okay? So this is the big in big data. This is a lot of data. And another thing this program can do is it can measure the emotional content of words. Does this word express a positive emotion, a neutral emotion, a negative emotion? So they looked at that, and they said, I wonder if people's negative and positive emotions change over the course of a day. We know what time the tweets are tweeted. We can plot the emotional level of the words people use against time of day. Does it show a discernible pattern in mood? And the answer was, you're right. Because why else would I be mentioning it, right? The answer was, you betcha. All right? There was systematically a peak, a trough, and a recovery. Mood went up, mood went down, mood recovered. A peak, a trough, and a recovery. So let's think about that for a second. All right, let's put it over here on the pink shelf here. Just put that piece of research on the shelf here. Another discipline, another methodology. Daniel Kahneman, who many of you are familiar with at least. He's a psychologist. He won the Nobel Prize in economics. He worked with some other social scientists, including a fellow named Alan Kruger, who was the head of the Council of Economic Advisors under Barack Obama. They came up with something called the day reconstruction method, where they asked people to write down each episode of your day and how you're feeling about it, and the time you're doing it. 7 o'clock, eating breakfast. I'm 8 out of 10 in positive mood. 9:30 on a Saturday morning, I'm at South by Southwest. Okay, I'm total 10 out of 10 on positive mood. All right? So write down your mood for each episode and time of day. What did they find? Then they plotted it against time of day. What did they find? This chart right here. A peak, a trough, and a recovery. Peak, trough, recovery. Now, this is not exactly the same shape as this, but it rhymes, right? Up, down, up again. And what's amazing is that no matter what methodology, no matter what the discipline is, people who are looking at the pattern of our mood over the course of a day keep finding the same thing. Up, down, up. So let's put that over here on the shelf. Now, we care about mood because mood is important, but one reason mood is important is that mood affects performance. And so we care about how we perform on the job doing different things. So let me give you a couple of examples of performance, right? Mood affects performance, performance affects mood. How does performance change, if at all, over the course of a day? Here's where it gets, I think, super interesting. So let's talk about public companies. We dramatically turned down the lights here, so I can't see, which is cool. Anybody here work for a public company? Company listed on, there's got to be plenty of people who work on a public company listed on the stock exchange. Okay, so public companies, as most of you know, do quarterly earnings calls. Quarterly earnings calls. They have the CEO, the CFO, maybe a couple of other executives. They get on this call with analysts and journalists in the industry. They report, here are our earnings this quarter. Here's what we expect last quarter. Here are the good things that are happening. Here, whispered, are the bad things that are happening. And these, you know from following the financial press, that these calls can make a difference in the stock price. So these researchers from NYU had a great idea. They said, wait a second. All of these earnings calls are transcribed. Actually, you know what? Could you put up the house lights? I'm sorry to make you do that, who's ever running the lights. I like to see you guys. Or not. It's all right. It's cool. Okay, now you do it. Thank you. All right, I appreciate it. I like that better. I mean, I don't know. You guys aren't having a problem seeing. Are you guys having a problem seeing the screen or me? No. Okay, cool. All right, so I'd rather see you. So, so what are we talking about? Oh, yes, we're talking about earnings calls. Okay, now this is cool. Okay, so earnings calls are transcribed. They're transcribed. What does that make it when it's transcribed? It makes it text, right? So we can use the same program we use in the Twitter thing to analyze the transcripts of earnings calls. So these researchers at NYU took the transcripts of 26,000 calls. All right? I just really want to underscore the bigness of big data and how difficult it is to find insights using other kinds of, like this gives you kinds of insights that you won't get. They're not always right, they're not foolproof, they're not the only insights, but it's giving you a window that you wouldn't otherwise have. 26,000 calls, 2,100 companies, 6.5 years. They started out looking for something else, and then they asked on a whim, I wonder if the emotions expressed in these earnings calls change over the course of a day, whether it's a call early in the morning, mid-morning, midday, afternoon. Do their emotions change? And the answer was, yeah. Afternoon calls were more negative, irritable, and combative. This is the key thing here, leading to temporary stock mispricings for firms hosting earnings calls later in the day. Now that's a pretty significant thing, right? So think about the people who are doing these earnings calls. CEOs and CFOs of public companies, generally pretty astute, right? Anybody know, do these guys prepare for these calls? Heck yeah, they prepare. They prepare like crazy. They have talking points. They anticipate questions. They go in extremely well prepared. Do they have anything at stake? Heck yeah. Their whole compensation is at stake. So here you have smart, prepared, heavily incentivized people, and they're leaking. Their emotions are changing. And this is true even if you, the main thing here is even if you control for the fundamentals. If I have terrible earnings, I'm going to be irritable, right? But even if you control for that, calls in the afternoon were more negative, combative, and irritable than calls in the morning. And this is the amazing thing. It led to, as you saw on the slide, temporary stock mispricings. That the stock was mispriced for a short time because it was brought down too much by the negative sentiment, not by the fundamentals. And I am convinced there is someone out there who has written a program to exploit the delta between the true price and the temporary stock mispricing. I'm convinced someone has written this program and is making money off of this change. She's probably here, financing her A round. And it's so bad that these researchers do something that academics very rarely do, is that they actually gave practical advice. An important takeaway from our study for corporate executives is that communications with investors and probably other critical managerial decisions should be conducted later in the day. Earlier in the day. Just trying to see if you were reading. That's a corporate world. Let's talk about education. Let's talk about standardized tests in Denmark. Whoa, someone was hooting for standardized tests in Denmark. Someone who's massively hungover, obviously. All right. Standardized tests. But I would hoot and holler for standardized tests in Denmark for the very reason that we're studying standardized tests in Denmark. Here's why. In Denmark, students take standardized tests on computers. In the US, students are still taking them on, not all of everybody, but predominantly on pencil and paper. They take tests, standardized tests on computers. The typical Danish school, though, has more students than computers. As a consequence, not everybody can take the test at the same time. So the students are randomly assigned to take the tests at different times of day. Some are randomly assigned to take them in the morning. Some are randomly assigned to take them in the afternoon. Does that matter? Let's take a look. For every hour later in the day, scores decrease. We find that an hour later in the day causes a deterioration in test score that is equivalent to slightly lower household income, less parental education, and missing 2 weeks of school. That's a little alarming. You've got this kid who takes a test in the morning, and this kid takes a test in the afternoon, and she scores lower? Now, that's alarming. So we're going to make policy based on standardized tests when there's that big of an effect? I'll tell you what's more alarming. Are we going to make decisions about this kid when her scores would be different if she were randomly assigned to a different date, different time? This is big. And on and on and on it goes. No matter what domain of life you're talking about, there are discernible differences in performance over the course of a day. I'll give you the one that is most alarming, I think most alarming. Healthcare. Healthcare. Seriously, if you learn nothing else today, you have no other takeaway than this. As I mentioned earlier, do not willingly go into a hospital or an important doctor's appointment in the afternoon. Seriously. I would not let anybody in my family willingly go to an important doctor's appointment or a hospital in the afternoon. Here's why. I'll give you some startling evidence here. Anesthesia errors, 4 times more likely at 3 p.m. than at 9 a.m. Let's talk about hand washing in hospitals. I don't have this chart, but I'll draw it for you, okay? This axis, we're going to draw a chart in an air, all right? Here we go. This vertical axis is the percentage of time that nurses wash their hands when they have a professional obligation to wash their hands, all right? And this is time of day. This is an easy chart to draw. Percentage of time they wash their hands when they have an obligation to wash their hands. This is time of day. Here's a chart. Massive, massive drop-off in hand washing in afternoons in hospitals. You know what? It's 9:40 in the morning on a Saturday. Let's talk about colonoscopies, all right? Colonoscopies. Doctors find half as many polyps in afternoon exams as they do in morning exams for the same population. Over and over and over. What do we learn from this? The pattern of mood, the pattern of performance. This is a big deal. Let there be light. This is a big deal. Yeah, God just awoke saying, oh my God, I didn't know this. This is my universe, and there's these incredible diurnal patterns. I better pay attention to this. Here, God, are 3 key points. Just for you. 1, our cognitive abilities don't remain static over the course of the day. This is so important. Somehow we've come to believe it's like, oh, it's basically this. It's not. You know this in your gut. You need to know this fortified by the science. Our cognitive abilities don't remain static over the course of the day. 2, these daily fluctuations are more extreme than we realize. Here's Russell Foster at Oxford. He says, the performance change between the daily high point and the daily low point can be equivalent to the effect on performance of drinking the legal limit of alcohol. 3, the best time to perform a task depends on the nature of the task. So let that sink in. This is not even the slide to take a picture of. I mean, take a picture of it, but this is not even the good one. All right? Let's talk about what to do about it. Because the good news in all of this is that we can use the science to set some pretty smart, easy-to-follow guidelines for when to do things. Here's what we know. Your daily win. We move through the day, typically, in 3 stages. A peak, a trough, and a recovery. Up, down, up again. Now, that's true for 80% of us. About 20% of us are night owls. People who wake up early and go to sleep, wake up late and go to sleep late. 20% of us are strong night owls. About 15% of us are strong morning people, larks, and most of us, 2/3 of us, are kind of in the middle. All right, so about 80% of us go through the day, peak, trough, recovery. Owls are the exception. They tend to go, owls are very complicated. They tend to go through the day, recovery, trough, peak. All right, and owls have it very hard. The entire corporate world is designed to crush the spirits of owls. Crush the spirit of evening people. So, let's talk about the peak. For most of us, it's the morning. During the peak, here's the key point in the research. During the peak, that's when we are most vigilant. This is the word I want to focus on here, vigilance. That's when our vigilance is highest. What does that mean? Vigilance means you're able to bat away distractions. During our peak, that's when we should be doing analytic work, work that requires heads down, focus, and attention. Writing a report, going over carefully a strategy, analyzing data. The work that requires to be locked down, focused, heads down, intensely focused on something. That's when we should be doing our analytic work. During the trough, that early afternoon, that's not good for very much. I don't think we realize how not good for very much it is. If you look at car accidents, obviously there are going to be more car accidents the more cars there are on the road. But once you control for that, the most dangerous time to be on the road is 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. Not a surprise. The second most dangerous time, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. during that trough. The trough is not good for very much. So during the trough, we should be doing our administrative work, answering our routine emails, filling out our TPS reports. I would have thought that would have landed better at South by Southwest. Interesting. Got to make a note of that one. Ixnay on the Office Space references. All right. Recovery is an interesting period. Recovery, remember what's going on here. Peak, trough, recovery. In the recovery, our mood is generally higher. Our mood is back high, but we're less vigilant. So think about that combination. Higher mood, less vigilance. That makes it a very good time for what are called insight problems. Things that require not algorithmic. This is the slide you want to take a picture of. Because this is going to give you such good guidance here. We want to do work, if we have the combination of elevated mood and a lack of vigilance, that makes it very good for creative, iterative kinds of work, like brainstorming. Imagine you've been in brainstorming sessions where some hyper-vigilant person is saying, that's a bad idea, that's a bad idea, that's a bad idea, that's a bad idea. Right? You don't want to be super vigilant in those kinds of settings. You actually want to be a little bit looser. And so the combination of that looseness and the elevated mood makes it a good time for that kind of work. And this is basically the answer here. All right? We should be doing our analytic work during the peak, our administrative work during the trough, and our insight work during the recovery. That's the answer, but here's the problem. We don't do that. I didn't do that. And I'm a sinner here. So I'm a writer, all right? So, and I'm in the middle, but a little bit toward the lark side. So I should be doing my analytic work like writing, which requires heads down focus. I should be doing that in the morning. And so there have been many days when I come to my office in the morning and I say, okay, I'm going to get some writing done. Let me just answer a couple emails first. So I answer 3 emails, then I answer 13 emails, then it's 23 emails, like, okay, clear the decks, feeling good, got to write. There's got to be something going on Twitter. Let me just check that out quickly, see what's going on. You know, and then like 6 ESPN highlight reels later, it's lunchtime, and I've gotten nothing done. And I come back and I try to do my, if we can put that slide back up, I come back to do my analytic work during the trough, and it's miserable. It's like riding a bike uphill against the wind. But organizations are even worse. Think about this. And this is my rant, my pet peeve of the year. Meetings. Not the existence of meetings, although that's close to a peeve. But when we schedule meetings in organizations, we use only one criterion. What is that criterion? Availability. Who said that? Availability. Yes. Tell me your first name. Daniel. Oh, good name, Daniel. All right, so Daniel, not surprisingly, is dead on. Right, availability. Availability. It's the only criterion we use in meetings. We don't say, what kind of meeting is this? Are we analyzing something? Are we doing more iterative kinds of brainstorming work? Is it a purely administrative thing? We don't think about that. We don't say, we have a lot of morning people at this meeting? Do we have a lot of evening people at this meeting? Do we have a lot of people in between? We don't think about that. The only thing we care about is availability. It's like we treat it with the strategic rigor of what brand of paper towel should we use in the company restroom, right? It's like that level of seriousness. That's a really bad idea, because that when question should be a strategic question. And so it's frustrating to a lot of you who work in organizations. Let's say you're a person who's doing your analytic work better in the morning, and your boss comes in and says, oh, we're going to have a 9:30 meeting about the travel voucher policy. Bad idea. So what do you do about this? Well, here we go. This is an important factoid, too. Time of day effects can explain 20% of the variance in human performance on workplace tasks. All right, so we think about the statistical concept of variance. What explains why some people perform differently from others? Some of it would be intelligence. Fred performs better than Ed because Fred is smarter. Fred performs better than Ed because he's more conscientious. Fred performs better than Ed because he has more social advantage. All kinds of ways to explain that variance. 20% of it is time of day. You can do something about that. So what do you do about it? Here are the takeaways. 1, be much more intentional and deliberate in scheduling individual and team work. When people work often matters as much as what they do. When is a strategic decision? We have to be intentional about that. How many of you yesterday, Friday, had a to-do list? Anybody have a to-do list? That is intentionality right there. You're writing something down. You're being intentional about what you're doing. We're intentional about what we're doing. We're intentional about who we do it with. We're intentional about how we do it. When it comes to when we do stuff, it's just about every hour. You have to be intentional about when you do things. And the main thing here, back to that chart, move the analytic task to the peak, the administrative task to the trough, and the insight task to the recovery. That's the ball game right there. And you can get so much extra juice in productivity and creativity and just overall well-being by making that simple change. And the opportunity is big because we don't take these questions of when as seriously as we take these questions of what and how. Let's go to the next one. It'll be much shorter here. We're going to take some questions, too, in a few moments. Number 2, we underestimate the power of breaks. Breaks matter a heck of a lot more than we realize. Here, I'm going to be brief. I'm going to give you one chart here. But this is I would say, as alarming as the healthcare research. This is a study. Most of the research I write about in this new book is fairly obscure. It hasn't gotten a lot of public attention. This one study has gotten some public attention, so some of you might be familiar with it. It's a study of parole judges in Israel. And these judges are making decisions about whether these prisoners get parole. Hey, I've served 5 years. I should be able to go free now. And the judge can say, nope, you got to serve out your 8-year sentence. Or, oh, you know what? You've been a good prisoner. You can go free. Big decision. These researchers, including Jonathan Levov at Stanford, looked at the pattern of parole decisions over the course of a day. I'm going to show you a chart here. The vertical axis is your probability of getting parole. The horizontal axis is time of day. Take a look at this. Early in the day, you're in good shape. Boom. Judge has a break, up. Break ends, down. Judge has another break, up. Big down. Now this should worry us as citizens, even though it's not our country, unless you're Israeli, even though it's not, this should worry us, because we think that judges are meting out sentences and parole decisions based on the facts, based on the evidence, based on notions of justice, and you're seeing a big pattern of time of day here. So think about this. Think about you have a loved one coming up for parole, and his hearing is right before the judge has her break, her first break. You're staying in the pokey, right? You got what is that, like an 8% chance of getting parole. You have a 92% chance of staying in prison. The next guy, and remember, the order is randomly assigned, and it's also affected by how long the previous case took, like where you fall. The next guy, randomly assigned, he comes in after the judge has her break. He's up to, what is that, like in the high 60%. Not because of the facts, but because of the time of day. But what I want to focus on here is look at how different the judge behaves after she's had a break. It's almost like being before a different judge. And this is one of the things that breaks do to us. I don't want to suggest that giving parole is always the best decision. It's not. But what we see here is that after a break, a judge is at least willing to challenge her default decision. The default decision in parole is no. But after a break, she's willing to consider other things and challenge the default. She and these judges perform radically different after a break. And this is what we know about breaks. I'll be really, really concise here. 1, we should be taking more breaks. 2, we should be taking certain kinds of breaks. Here's the analogy. Remember 15 years ago or so, in the workplace, for those of you who were in the workplace 15 years ago. 15 years ago, someone who would come in and say, I haven't slept more than 3 hours for 6 weeks. This is my second consecutive all-nighter. And we looked at that person and said, he is a hero. It's always a guy. He is a hero. I always felt, those people always made me feel bad because I couldn't do that. Right? For me, all-nighters I had a boss who once made me do all-nighters. It was miserable, horrid experience. And I always felt bad, like sort of, I'm so frail, I'm so feckless, I'm not fully committed like that crazy dude over there. Then what happened? Over the last 15 years, we've learned a lot about the science of sleep. And that science of sleep has penetrated public consciousness. So now we look at that person today and say, you're not a hero, you're an idiot. You're hurting your performance, you're probably hurting my performance. I'm convinced the science of breaks is where the science of sleep was 15 years ago, that it's deep enough to give us new insights, and it's about to penetrate the public consciousness. We should be taking more breaks, and here's the key, we should be taking certain kinds of breaks. And what the research tells us very clearly, this is where the research distills so nicely in giving us guidance, is that we know the right kinds of breaks to take. So these are the right kinds of breaks to take. This is a good slide to take a picture of too when I get all 5 of those things on there. 1, something beats nothing. A 1 or 2 minute break is better than taking no break at all. 2, moving beats stationary. You're better off moving around, a lot of you know this already, than being sedentary. 3, this is interesting, social beats solo. Social breaks, breaks with somebody else, are more restorative for people than solo breaks, even for introverts. Pretty amazing on that one. 4, outside beats inside. The effects of being in nature, literally being able to see trees or grass or the sky, is potent, more potent than I would have imagined. And finally, this is really important, fully detached beats semi-detached. Fully detached beats semi-detached. What does that mean? There's research showing if I tell you guys, take a break at work, take a 15-minute break at work to walk around with a colleague, but be sure when you walk around with a colleague, talk about work. I mean it. You, take a 15-minute break with a colleague, walk around, talk about anything except work. Any topic is acceptable except work. These people come back, they perform better. The people who have detached. Same thing is true, not surprisingly, with phones. And so what's going on? So let's talk about the takeaways here. 1, don't think of breaks as a deviation from work. Think of them as part of work. This is the conceptual click that we have to make here. And Americans have a terrible time with this. What's so crazy about this country, there are many crazy things about this country. What's so crazy about this country is that no matter where you're from, no matter how your family got here, whether they came here willingly, whether they emigrated from Europe or Africa or Asia or South America or anywhere in the world, it's almost like you spend, I don't know, like a few hours on the soil of America, and a certain amount of Puritanism starts seeping through your shoes, all right? And so all of us, again, people who have zero connection, I mean, look, like I can predict based on what many of you look like that the odds are very small you have any family connection to the Puritans, all right? And yet, we have this very puritanical view where you don't want to show weakness, you want to power through. Powering through is how you get stuff done. Powering through is morally virtuous, and it's not true. Breaks are part of your performance, not a deviation from performance. I got this wrong too, because believe me, my family has zero connection to the Puritans. No, it's true. There were not a lot of Puritans in the shtetls of Riga, Latvia in 1800, all right? And yet I had this very puritanical view where you got to power through. You got to power through. Breaks are a weakness. Breaks are a concession. My view, again, diametrically 100% wrong, was that, yeah, amateurs take breaks, but professionals don't. It's the exact opposite. Amateurs are the ones who don't take breaks. Professionals take breaks. And you see this in a lot of research on performance, especially with athletes and musicians. So, second thing is, so that's the conceptual thing. The tactical thing that you should do is make a break list. And I've started doing this, and it's transformative for me. What you have to do is, here's the word again, you have to be intentional about these breaks. You have to be intentional about taking these breaks. And the way to be intentional about them is basically to schedule it, to write it down and do it. So what I do now, when I'm writing, I work in the garage behind my house, is I will make a break list. I'll say 1 p.m., walk. And I will go and I'll take like a 10-minute walk around my neighborhood just to clear my head. Come back, all right? Nothing radical or anything like that, all right? Or at 4 o'clock, my wife also works at home. And so, so I might like 4 o'clock post office. Hey, Jessica, you want to go walk to the post office? There's a post office. I live in Washington, D.C. It's a post office, like 7-minute walk from our house. Go walk to the post office, drop something. It's an exciting life. I'm admitting that right now, all right? There was like this sort of sadness came over everybody outside. And it's like, no, this is not a sad story. No, I'm going to defend this, actually, all right? I'm actually going to defend that walk with my wife to the post office, all right? Because something beats nothing. We're moving, right? I'm with somebody I like. It's social. I'm outside, and I'm not bringing my phone with me. So that 15-minute walk break is actually a pretty good idea. So yeah. But the key here is that you have to be intentional about it. The way to be intentional about it is to be intentional about your breaks as you are about your to-do list. Breaks are part of work, not a deviation from work. Okay, so let me give you one more thing here. It's totally cool, it's totally interesting, but what I want to do is I want to widen the aperture a little bit here. I don't want to talk about the day. I want to talk about broader notions of timing, because we live our lives in episodes. We don't have a linear view. Our lives don't proceed in a linear way. They're episodic. And episodes have beginnings, middles, and ends. And each of these stages, beginnings, middles, and ends, have different effects on our behavior. So I'm going to talk about, there's so much good stuff here, but I want to talk about endings, because endings are super cool. There's so much good stuff on endings, too. I'm going to give you a taste of endings here. How do endings affect us? Among the things that endings do is that endings help us energize and they help us elevate. They help us energize and they help us elevate. So let's talk about marathons. Anybody here ever run a marathon? Well, lots of you. Cool. All right. So at what age are people most likely to run their first marathon? 40, 45? 22, 30? Okay, here's the answer. 29. The age at which people are most likely to run their first marathon is 29. Why? Because it's a prime number? You're about to turn 30. Okay, so tell me your first name. Jocelyn. Jocelyn says you're about to turn 30. Interesting. Let's see. As luck would have it, I have a chart to test Jocelyn's hypothesis. 29-year-olds, twice as likely to run a first marathon as 28-year-olds. 29-year-olds, twice as likely to run a first marathon as 30-year-olds. Are there massive physiological differences between a 28-year-old human and a 29-year-old human? But they're twice as likely to do it at 29 as they are at 28, and twice as likely to do it at 29 as they are at 30? Whoa, that's kind of weird. Why is that, Jocelyn? We're hitting 30. There's an end. Endings help us energize. I'll give you another question here. What's another age? I'll give you a hint. It's like maybe 10 years later. What's another age at which people are disproportionately likely to run their first marathon? 39. Okay, here's a harder question. What's another age at which people are disproportionately likely to run their first marathon? 49. You guys are brilliant. And as luck would have it, I have that chart. Here we go. 49-year-olds are 3 times as likely to run a first marathon as 50-year-olds. This is a function of... Now, a life decade is a completely meaningless thing in biological terms, right? It has no physiological significance at all. If we had a different numbering system, right? If we had a base 12 or base 9 numbering system, right? It wouldn't matter turning 30. And yet, it gets people to behave in dramatically different ways because endings help us energize. When we see the end, we kick a little harder. This is a very, very sturdy principle of psychological science. Let me give you another example of endings here. Suppose I were a far more generous person. And I said, you know what? I just love South by so much, I'm going to give everybody here a gift certificate. But I'm going to do it a little bit differently. This group I'm going to give a gift certificate to, and I'm going to say to you, you have 3 weeks to cash in this gift certificate. And I give you guys a gift certificate, I'm going to be a little bit more generous to you. I'm going to say, you guys have 2 months to cash in this gift certificate. Who's more likely to redeem the gift certificate? You think these guys are? All right, let's take a look. The group that had 3 weeks, 31% of them. Only 31% of them cashed in the gift certificate. This group over here that had 2 months, over twice as much time, only 6% of them cashed it in. That makes no sense. This group had twice as much time, over twice as much time to do something. This group did it more. Why? Lacks urgency. Nicely said. Jocelyn says lacks urgency. Right. The ending imposes, it's a nice way to put it, the ending imposes a sense of urgency. When people see the end, they kick a little harder. I'll give you one other aspect of endings. I've got some good news and some bad news. So this is a famous line, and I was always curious, who said this? Who said this? So I went to the Google to do a little research, and I found out that it was everybody. Everybody has said this. But here's my question for you. What should you give first, the good news or the bad news? Bad news? Good news? Okay, here you go. I give the good news first. I'll tell you why. 1, it's uncomfortable giving bad news. 2, I feel like if I give bad news at the outset, people will just shut down. All right? They'll stop listening to me. 3, you want to lay down a cushion. You don't want to be a total jerk, all right? You want to lay down a cushion before bringing down the hammer. Now, let me ask you a different question. Forget about giving good news and bad news. Let's say you're on the receiving end of the good news and bad news. What do you want to get first? How many of you want the good news first, to receive the good news first? How many of you want to receive the bad news first? Look at that. Overwhelmingly, 4 out of 5 people prefer to begin with a loss or negative outcome and ultimately end with a gain or positive outcome rather than the reverse. And this suggests that we're doing it wrong, as these researchers, this is Angela Legg and Kate Sweeney, our findings suggest that doctors, teachers, and partners might do a poor job of giving good news and bad news because they forget for a moment how they want to hear news when they are patients, students, and spouses. What's going on here? Very important, another very important principle of endings. Given a choice, human beings prefer endings that elevate. We prefer rising sequences at the end to declining sequences at the end. This is so deeply important in almost every part of our lives. If you look at how people remember entire lives, people will remember the entire life of a human being based on how that human being behaved at the very end. People will remember, here's the best example of this on the power of endings. Look at Yelp reviews of restaurants. Yelp reviews of restaurants. Just go randomly look at a few. You will see a disproportionate number of reviews talk about what happened at the very end of the meal. They screwed up my check and were jerks about it. I hate this place. I left my keys in the booth and they ran after me into the parking lot to give me my keys. I love this place. Given a choice, human beings prefer endings that elevate. We prefer rising sequences to declining sequences. One more study, then we'll take some questions. This study has to do with Hershey's Kisses. Study done at the University of Michigan. And the researchers at the University of Michigan set up a table at the University of Michigan Student Center. And they said, we're going to have a taste test of Hershey's Kisses. We're going to have a taste test of Hershey's Kisses. And so they invited students to come to this taste test, and they treated people two different ways. So the first group came. Tell me your first name right there. Matt. Okay, so Matt is a student at the University of Michigan. He's walking through the student center. I say, Matt, would you like to participate in this taste test of Hershey's Kisses made with local ingredients? Yes, Matt says, with completely devoid of any enthusiasm. But still, he's going to do it. All right. Here's what they do. So Matt, here's a Hershey's Kiss. Here's a candy. Taste it and rate on a scale of 1 to 10. Here's your next one. Here's your next one. Here's your next one. Here's your next one. So you get 5, but you don't know how many you're getting. Okay, that's it. So tell me your first name. Trisha? Trisha, would you like to participate in a taste test of Hershey's Kisses? Yes, she says. That's how you do it, Matt. Okay? All right? Thank you. Here's a Hershey's Kiss. Please taste it and rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. Here's your next one. Here's your next one. Here's your next one. Listen carefully. Here's your last one. Does calling it the last one affect how people in Trisha's condition are going to evaluate that Hershey's Kiss? And the answer, of course, is you betcha. Let's take a look at the chart. All right, so the gray is the Matt group, and the yellow is the Trisha group, okay? So this is not a statistically significant difference. So this is the first kiss, the first candy, the second candy, the third candy, the fourth candy. Holy moly, look at that fifth candy. Do people like that last chocolate? They love that last chocolate. They love it, they love it, they love it. They love it more than any chocolate they ate. They love it more than any chocolate anybody ate. It's the same chocolate each time. Given a choice, human beings prefer endings that elevate. So here are your takeaways, and we'll take some questions on endings. Number 1, shine a light on endings to energize yourself and others. Endings can really help you move, all right? And so for long types of things, interim endings can be a very powerful way to kick a little harder. 2, always give the bad news first, for reals. Always give the bad news first. I've completely changed my way on this myself. 3, highlight the last chocolate. Now, I'm not even sure what that means, all right? But I find that study, that chocolate study, which is consistent with many other things, there is a way to be much more intentional about what you do for customers, clients, prospects, as your last move, because that's going to be meaningful. That's going to be significant. They're going to view that differently. Highlight the last chocolate, whatever that may be in your life. The other thing that we see is that, to Jocelyn's point, why does 30 seems to trigger, 40, 50 seems to trigger a search for meaning. And a lot of the effect of endings is that they trigger a search for meaning. And so use endings as meaning makers. Endings are very powerful meaning makers. So I interviewed a lot of teachers in this book who were doing these extraordinary things at the end of a semester, at the end of a year, to kind of memorialize the year, bring the students closer together, these incredibly meaningful things that became meaningful because they happened at the end. So let me stop there, and let's take some questions. We're using the Slido technique. So let's see what we got here. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, so this one is, are there studies about whether nutrition or other substances can offset the trough? Nutrition or other substances, i.e. caffeine, can offset the trough. Can napping or exercise at certain times of the day help this? Okay, that's a good question. So let's talk about, there's a lot of stuff in there. This is from Anonymous. So much good stuff in there. Okay, so let's talk about caffeine for a little bit. There's a lot of good research on caffeine. I'm sort of slightly obsessed with caffeine research. 2 pieces of research on caffeine. 1, when should you drink, if you drink coffee, when should you drink your first cup of coffee? About an hour and a half after you wake up. Don't have your first cup of coffee when you first wake up. Why? I know this is disappointing for some of you. All right? When we first wake up, we start producing what's called cortisol, a stress hormone. Cortisol is one of the things that helps us wake up. Caffeine interferes with the production of cortisol. So having caffeine early actually doesn't help, it might hurt. What you're better off doing is waiting for that cortisol level to peak and then decline, which takes about an hour, and then hitting it with the caffeine. So have a cup of coffee about an hour after you wake up. This Anonymous mentions napping. Anybody take a nap? There's a huge amount of research on napping. And I'll tell you my experience with napping. I didn't love naps in the past. I took them periodically, but I would wake up feeling terrible, sort of groggy, fuzzy-headed, and also deeply ashamed of myself. So what did I discover in this research? I discovered that I was doing it wrong, that I was napping incorrectly. The ideal nap, to my amazement, is extraordinarily short. The ideal nap is only about 10 or 20 minutes long. All right? You go beyond 20 minutes, you start to develop what's called sleep inertia, which is that groggy, boggy feeling that you get when you sleep beyond that amount of time. So 10 to 20 minutes is the ideal length of a nap. But there's also a way, and some of you probably know this, there's a way to turbocharge these short naps. And so what I've started doing myself, based on this science, is the following. So I don't nap all that much, but when I do nap, here's how I nap. Especially if I haven't gotten enough sleep the night before and I'm in my office, I will take a nap, but I'll take a certain kind of nap. Here's what I do. I sit in a chair and I put on noise-canceling headphones. Then I have a cup of coffee. Stick with me. Down a cup of coffee right before my nap. Then I set my timer on my phone for about 25 minutes. Then I close my eyes. And at this point, I can usually fall asleep in 10 or 12 minutes. So let's say I fall asleep in 12 minutes. Timer goes off at 25. I have a 13-minute nap. That's good, right? So right in the 10 to 20-minute window. Timer goes off. I've had my 13-minute nap right in that sweet spot. But remember that cup of coffee. It takes about 25 minutes for coffee to enter our bloodstream, for caffeine to enter our bloodstream. So at the moment I'm waking up, okay, naps, these short naps, anybody here a hockey fan by any chance? Here's the way to think about naps. Naps are Zambonis for our brain, all right? During the day, we have all these like nicks and scuffs on our mental ice, and a nap is like a Zamboni. It comes out and goes, smooths everything down. So I've got that Zamboni-like nap, 13 minutes, but I had that cup of coffee. It takes 25 minutes for the caffeine to enter our bloodstream. At the moment I'm waking up without sleep inertia, I get that second hit of caffeine. This is known in the literature as a nappuccino. Well, can we go to the next page? Oh, wait, okay, here we go. Oh, okay, so, no, I'm sorry, there are more great questions here. Okay, here we go. So this is, how does this apply to sports and physical activity? What are the best times for highest performance? This is a great question here, too. So, and if actually any of you want to ask a question on the microphone, too, that's cool. So this is also from Anonymous, a prolific question asker here. So let's talk about the best time to exercise. Very clear answer to this question. It depends on your goals. It depends on your goals. Here's what the research shows. If your goals are to lose weight, exercise in the morning. You're marginally more likely to lose weight in morning exercise. If your goal is to establish a habit, exercise in the morning. It seems to be better for habit formation. Another reason to exercise in the morning. Exercise gives us an enduring mood boost. An enduring mood boost. And so if you exercise late in the day, you end up sleeping away some of that mood boost. So that's the argument for morning exercise, depending on your goals. Evening exercise is, or late afternoon and evening exercise is good for other kinds of things. Number one, it's best for avoiding injury. It's the best time to avoid injury because our body temperature changes and we're literally more warmed up. Second, people, and this is why I do it in the late afternoon and early evening, people report enjoying their exercise more at that time of day, which can actually aid in habit formation. They find it less effortful. They find it more enjoyable. And third, to this person's question, actually performance is often higher at that time of day. In fact, there are a disproportionate number of world records in speed events that were set between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. local time, probably because of body temperature as well. So morning exercise, if you want, for weight loss, habit formation, and enduring mood boost. Afternoon exercise to enjoy it more, which will aid in habit formation, perform higher, and avoid injury. Yes, do you have a question right there, this gentleman right there?
Yes. So I read your book. It was
Thank you.
It does seem, though, that a lot of the findings are related to white-collar professionals.
Yeah.
What does the research, is there any research that talks about implications of chronobiology for people that go into blue-collar industries?
Oh, it's the same. It's fairly similar, actually. So there actually is some research out there, and there's some good stuff. So let's give you 2 examples of that. Tell me your first name.
Santiago.
Santiago. So Santiago's question. So there's some really good, there is a lot of good research on this. So one thing, let's talk about white-collar workers are less likely, except in certain medical professions, to do what's called shift work. That is to work from 11 o'clock in the evening to 7 o'clock in the morning. But there's certain kinds of blue-collar work where you have that overnight shift work. There's a lot of research on shift work, and it says it is really, really bad for you. It is really bad for your physical health. It is really bad for your mental health. It actually has a lasting negative effect. Shift work is really, really bad. On the other hand, there are some examples from Till Roenberg, who is a chronobiologist in Munich, has done some work with steel plants and auto factories where they adjusted the work schedule to fit more with people's chronobiology. So the lark people were able to come in earlier. The owl people were able to work slightly later shifts, not overnight, because that's a disaster for everybody. The owls were able to work later shifts. And what he found doing that is less attrition, higher satisfaction, higher productivity. So I think that these lessons are, I think what we want to do, especially in blue-collar work, is follow basically the same kinds of patterns and not force too many people to adopt to the organization, but adapt the organization to the people. Make sense? So let's take. We have time for maybe one more, 2 more. 1 more, 2 more. Yes, sir.
I was wondering what your advice would be in the trough phase, where you might have a portion of your job that's related to customer service or making yourself available for people in conversation.
Yeah.
Where my job, as I run a franchise system and I try to make myself available to our owners, I very much would like to keep my morning time when I could really be strategic and keep looking at the business. But then I do worry that I'm making myself available at a time where, on the other end of the conversation, even if I manage to, using a lot of your principles, on the other side of the conversation, I'm carving out this time when somebody else is maybe going to be more irritable. What's your advice?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think there are a couple things that you can do. Number one is that you can avoid some of the trough problem. Well, I guess my main thing would be this. Experiment with it. Try it both ways. So maybe what you do is you just alternate. All right. So one day you do your available stuff in the morning. The next day you do your heads down strategic stuff in the morning. So one of the most important things in this research is that we need to be better observers of our own behavior and test things out. A lot of people here are running A/B tests on customers and things like that. We should be doing more A/B tests on ourselves. How does it feel to do this time of day? How does it feel to do that time of day? And test it out. So that would be my meta advice for you. If you want to stick with that system where you're making yourself available in the late afternoon, or in the afternoon, in that trough period, what I would do is I would be much more intentional about taking breaks. And I would actually be much more observant about how you're feeling during that. So you might even want to take like a short 5-minute break every half hour. Or certainly not schedule calls and meetings and things back to back to back to back to back. I would be super, super intentional about the breaks during then. The other thing that I would do is I would also be intentional about what kinds of issues are coming up. So you have something even close to a checklist. So you know what are some common issues, what are some of the best answers that I've been able to give, so you're not trying to draw on your hazy memory every time during the worst time of day. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Let me wrap up on this. I'll wrap up, let you guys go. So I've got some good news and some bad news. All right? Okay, all right, sure. So the bad news is that for whatever reason, we don't take these issues of when seriously enough. We take these issues of what we do and how we do it and who we do it with really, really seriously. If you look at the conversations going on at South by, many of them are focused on that. What should I do? Who should I do it with? How should I do it? We're giving short shrift to this question of when we do things. When we do things matters. It has a material effect on every aspect of our life. It has an effect on our productivity. It has an effect on our creativity. It has an effect on our overall well-being. I'm not saying it's more important than what we do or how we do it or who we do it with, but it's as important. And the way to actually make it work to your advantage is to be intentional about it. The bad news is we don't take it seriously enough. The good news is that there is so much evidence, so much research out there that you can actually get big gains at a relatively low cost of time and attention and heartache. And so my charge to you now is when you leave South by, change one thing in your life when it comes to timing. Just try one thing, and I think you'll see an uptick in performance, and I hope you'll see an uptick in happiness. Thank you for having me.